Welcome to WTCI's Global Business Webinar Series. We're excited to have with us today Bruce McIndoe, President and founder of World Aware, as we cover another very important topic for today, the future of globalization. We started this series to make sure that our members are staying connected and that they're having access to some key topics that are of interest to the business community. Last week, we looked at Maryland's pathway to recovery with WTCI's board member and the Secretary of the Department of Commerce, Kelly Schultz. And today, we look at the future of globalization. Bruce will lead this session, and he will also lead the next two sessions, one on global food security, scheduled for 1 week from today, and then the other one on the overall damages and impact of COVID-19 to society and business and various industries. For those of you I have not met, my name is Eddie Resende, and I'm the co-CEO of the World Trade Center Institute. It's a pleasure to be here with all of our members, our board of directors, and the WTCI team. Thank you all for calling in today. So let me walk you through the agenda. I'm going to be introducing Bruce in just a second. We'll have a 10-minute of presentation, followed by another 10 minutes of Q&A. Throughout this presentation, you can submit your questions via the Q&A channel where you can find it underneath your screen. And please share your questions throughout the presentation. Also, the name of your company. We have your name, but the company name we'll be calling out during the Q&A as well. So Bruce McIndoe, as I mentioned, is the president and founder of World Aware, an organization that provides intelligence to companies throughout the world to make sure that their operations are safe, that their staff are aware and educated of global events and risks that may cause to different organizations. I've known Bruce for over 10 years, and he's been on the board of WTCI for over 6 years. So we're excited to have him here today. Prior to World Aware, Bruce worked for the CIA, the NSA, the Department of Defense. He has a bachelor's degree in physics and a master's in computer science from Johns Hopkins University. And he is also an adjunct professor at University of Maryland University campus, the global campus. And Bruce is an expert leader on management, technology, and intelligence. He is our go-to guy for global events and risks and how various risks throughout the world may impact business. Today's session is top of mind for many global CEOs, the future of globalization. Even before this crisis, Bruce, it felt like globalization was being under attack. On one hand, you've got this movement that helped to lift millions out of poverty. Products were able to be produced more effectively and cheaper throughout the world. We created this more connected world. But on the other hand, you've got these growing frustration from governments around the world on jobs being displaced, mass migration, and also issues with automation, which I know you're going to be talking about it today. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for being here. Last I saw you was in January, and it was before the lockdown, and you mentioned that this was going to be with us for at least 6 months. And I think it's fair to say that this is going to be going on for much longer and having a residual impact on business and trade. So excited to hear from you on what's in store for globalization and trade in general. Thank you for being here. Bruce?
Yep, thanks a lot, Eddie, and thanks everyone for participating. I want to start, we're doing a series of things here, but I thought it was important to give you a little context with what we do. All right, let's see. Any other time? Oh, there we go. All right. So one of the major things that we do for our clients is horizon scanning and future forecasting. And we look at 5, we call them mega threads, so kind of key areas that drive what the future will look like. And we actually do a briefing and publishing on, for example, the world in 2050. And one of the key elements that drives these future trends is the whole globalization that we've been living through largely since World War II, but also the rise of nationalism. We'll talk a little bit about that in this conversation. But just be aware that these are the other four areas that are very important in thinking about the future and what's happening. So in starting with this, when we looked at this, we had first indications right at the end of December about, a cluster of these individuals in Wuhan. And then in early January, could see how things were moving. And at that time, no one knew much about the novel coronavirus, but it was clear on the trajectory that we were going to deal with this well into 2020. And as we've grown to understand more about the virus and what it's doing, and obviously we have a global pandemic, what most people may not get their heads around is that we have a massive issue going on worldwide that is at the scale of what the world had to deal with during World War II. And so as far as amassing resources and level of spend and people that are impacted, that's the scale that we're talking about here now. And so while we were optimistic in our what we call our 4 timeline model that we might this might come and go within 6 months, we're now in our timeline 4 model that we will deal with this well into 2021, if not entering 2022. So it is a very serious and impactful situation. So what does that mean relative to globalization? And I just wanted to baseline the conversation around globalization. And largely, we wouldn't have a pandemic today if we didn't have globalization in the planet. If we were, 200 years ago or 300 years ago and, kind of lived in our little village and dealt with whatever happened locally and the rest of the world didn't matter, this kind of thing wouldn't happen. But as soon as we invented the ship, at least ocean-going ship, and obviously modern technology around airplanes, we've now interconnected the world to allow a virus to transmit very quickly from one locale to hundreds of thousands. And now, every nook and cranny of the globe pretty much is seeing some level of viral activity. And so that network where we share, political engagement, economic is a big one that Eddie talked about, but also social, in that we learn about other societies and what they're doing, and what, is cool in the US becomes cool in other places and vice versa. So it's important to think about those 3 elements as we talk about globalization. So globalization has, really taken off since World War II and the advent of the, really push on the industrial age, and we saw great benefits, and we continue to invest in globalization for lots of reasons. But at the end of the day, for the U.S. Economy and the U.S. capitalism system, what it gave us was the ability to reach out to low-wage labor and access to resources that were less costly, both in a environmental as well as financial sense, and bring all of that together to deliver literally every product that you pick up in your life. So whether it's a box of cereal or a glass or your computer or whatever it may be, components of that, what I say from ground, from the natural resource that is the underlying material to the finished product that you're holding, can literally come from all over the globe. And the people that are participating in that are generating some income and wage in the context of their environment. And that's where we've lifted people out of poverty and had a lot of pros around globalization. But as Eddie alluded to, and it's, I would say in the last 20 years, and especially in the last decade, the luster of globalization has been worn. as we've been dealing with, of course, obviously the job losses that occurred in high wage countries, and all of the other kind of cascading issues that that were occurring due to the globalization area. And this concept, even, I would say, even before this pandemic, there was a lot of concern that multinational corporations start to have, because they control the money and the flow of goods, may end up in a very kind of global power position across the planet and potentially supplant global governance, especially as that's weakened over the last 5-6 years from a US perspective. And now the pandemic, I would argue, has put a bit of a kibosh on that, as well as the rise of China, but it's still a concern that's out there. So one of the things that has been talked about broadly is de-globalization, right? And that had already started, especially with the Trump administration and tariffs and all that's been going on with trade around China. There's been already a lot of energy around reducing the level of globalization, especially as it relates to supply chains and providing goods to the United States. And so, you know, this pandemic has kind of exposed all of that and made citizens and obviously our leadership in government and elsewhere more aware of that we are vulnerable vis-a-vis relying on fundamental products for our well-being that's linked to other countries that may not have our best interests in heart or may be damaged as the pandemic and what occurred in China and other countries. But the real vulnerability, and I think the real energy behind deglobalization, is not going to come broadly. It's going to become very specific. And that is when people think about what happened and is happening right now, that we don't have testing and that we don't have masks for our doctors and we don't have the fundamental drugs and reagents that we need to deliver medical care in the United States, because we do not have that capacity at home, creates a huge amount of energy to say we have to change that. And so we're seeing that, and then of course a rippling effect into other areas that people consider critical or essential to the country. We need to move that more onshore, meaning within our domestic production capability, or near shore, which means basically in our back door, Mexico being one of the prime recipients of that focus. But we can talk about the entire Americas at some point. So what does the future look like from our perspective? I have kind of three areas that I'm going to hit on, and then we'll open it up to conversation. I talked about this whole deglobalization and uncoupling from China. Again, everything has a dark side and a bright side, and uncoupling from China, where they are less dependent on us for their well-being and their economy, creates tremendous opportunity for conflict, whether it's cyber or kinetic war. So as people may want to jump up and down and say, let's decouple completely from China, as we've seen with Russia, that may not be a great outcome. But what we've seen is a more aggressive China. They want to come out of this the winner, but because of the demand and supply side being impacted simultaneously, which is a huge difference vis-a-vis this crisis versus, say, the financial crisis or other things that have occurred in the past. Even if they do bring their factories online, which they largely have right now, the demand is not there to run them at any kind of full capacity. And because of that, China will suffer GDP growth reduction. And of course, the entire Asian linkage will as well, except some of the winners like Vietnam, that is where some of the companies, or a lot of companies, have shifted production from China to Vietnam, and they've been one of the winners. We're seeing that it's not only goods that get produced in these global economies, but also data. And so we are seeing a major tension globally, especially between the US and China, but also Europe, around the whole online global digital economy. And we're seeing this being forced right now because of the way that we're living, and we've forced tens of millions, if not 100+ million Americans to actually force them to live online and get their groceries and order their carry out restaurants and buy other products online. And now they're saying as well, I go onto this thing and I click a few buttons and I hit my send, and a day or two later it appears at my doorstep. This is actually pretty cool. And so we really are, in an experiential way, training tens of millions of people to be more adept and actually value the ease and simplicity of digital trade, which of course will lead to more and more decline of brick and mortar outlets, especially retail and electronics and whatever it may be. And we're already seeing a number of the companies, filing for bankruptcy and that were teetering going into this, that are just not going to come out the other end. And of course, this is going to drive tremendous demand for just-in-time delivery, not from a supply chain sense of getting a manufacturer to bring something and have it into your warehouse just in time for you to do final assembly or ultimately deliver it to that client. But that concept of just-in-time delivery is actually going to go from producing that product directly to the consumer's location. And so, of course, talking about the Amazon drones and all of that kind of stuff is very much part of that. But changing the real nature of how we consume is going to be an interesting transition for all of us. And finally, talking about transitions and technology, everything that I've talked about, and including this, are all things that were already in motion. I did my first future forecasting section in 2008. When we were having the financial meltdown and talking about what was going to happen. And these things now are just being accelerated even faster as far as, for example, additive manufacturing, which is commonly called 3D printing. We're seeing people now, printing masks and printing respirators and ventilators and all kinds of things where you could actually produce a whole range of products in one warehouse. So you could actually print repair parts on demand rather than having to have a whole stocking of parts. And so that's a huge element that'll go into making economies, whether it's the US or anyone else, less dependent on foreign suppliers if they can actually produce them right there in your garage, right? Robotics and AI is, just to give you some examples, in Japan, we have hotels now whose the registration desks are essentially automatrons, robots that you go up, you can talk to them in like 40 languages, get your room assignment, key, and walk away and never see a human. The other thing that hotels are doing in China and Japan right now is delivering food to people when they order food for their room with robots. So they just go up the elevator and down the hall and deliver it to your room. And then I was in Japan last fall and walked into a cafe, and I was stunned because I could see this whirling motion, and the whole cafe was nothing but robots. You just put in, I want Americano with whole milk, And the robot produced it and done. And there was one fellow, I think he was probably, I don't know, probably my age, 60 something, just sitting in the corner. And his job was to kind of refill things, and everything else was run by robots. So when we think about nearshoring and especially onshoring of manufacturing and supply chains, robotics is what makes that work. If you can reduce the labor component, the labor cost, then we can actually compete here domestically with low-cost labor elsewhere in the globe. So we're going to see some pretty amazing and rapid changes to supply chains and the globalization of manufacturing and production. So I'll stop there, Eddie, and that's a lot of stuff to talk about.
All right, thank you, Bruce. We've got several questions from our callers. So I will start with Tom Morgan. Will post-COVID-19 era put more power in the public sector as opposed to the private sector? And if so, what could that look like, and what would some of positive and negative results?
Okay. So there's a lot of dimensions to that. Number one, global governance. Let's start at the top of the heap. Is weakened right now. The U.S. is largely disengaged from that forum, probably in a time with climate change, pandemics, nuclear weapons, and everything that we probably should be more engaged. But so that public sector governance is weakened substantially. If I look at governmental authorities, the pandemic is creating tremendous stresses in many nations. When you start locking people down and where they can't earn an income, then they get upset. And if they can't feed their families, they will act aggressively. So we're seeing this pandemic driving a lot of fissures in a lot of countries, and depending on how difficult it becomes, we can have some real serious geopolitical issues globally around that. As far as the multinationals, unfortunately, because of the decoupling of China and kind of the rest of the world, MNCs are having to now kind of kowtow to two masters. And we've seen that asserted by, the Chinese on the National Basketball Association and other organizations, where they can basically say, look, we're going to, not give you access to our economy if you don't follow our rules. And so MNCs found themselves not in the catbird seat, but now slave to two masters. And so they're struggling to regain any kind of global power in that regard. So right now, globally, it is a very complicated picture. Traditional diplomatic engagement is more difficult, and we are going to have to deal with a multipolar world in a very big way coming out of this pandemic.
Thank you. We've got another call from Jim Albrecht, former McCormick executive. He worries about dehumanizing of businesses and the decline of societies and cultures. Do you see future adjustments to accommodate social and cultural needs?
So when we look at future forecasting around these trends, the industrial age life that we have today was fabricated to feed factory production. It's just that, the whole Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, as we move people from agriculture and farms into cities to feed this industrial complex, we have come to this life where we are today. What we're seeing now is a transition, a now accelerated transition to change what the meaning of life is for humans on this planet, especially in developed countries. We are going to change our lifestyles. We've proven in the last months that many companies could have employees that live in Montana or Colorado or anywhere on the planet and still contribute into their business. So why does everybody have to cluster into big cities when they could have a wonderful lifestyle, outside in the country and have a home and gardens and whatever it may be. So we will see humans adapt to this new world in a way that enables them to have a completely different definition of what is life and work than we have today. And that'll be, in the decades ahead, but we're making that transition more real today.
Thank you, Bruce. We have a question from our good friend, Douglas Lee from the Hong Kong Trade and Investment Group up in New York. Hi, Doug. Sure. He's asking, what would you recommend that the U.S. government do to protect its national interests in the area of healthcare?
I think that the good thinkers on this, and I'm always a person that always looks for the benefits and the balance. We cannot, it's like anything in life. If you try to do everything on your own, you will never succeed because you'll never have the scale that you may ultimately need. So you really need to have diversity in what you're doing, and that includes healthcare. And so we need to have diversity in sourcing for various health components. What if our internal systems fail? That there's some, US specific disease that causes us not to be able to go into our factories, but it's not impacting the rest of the world. We're now toes up, right? So we have to look at resiliency. We have to look at diversity. And we need to say there needs to be a certain level of capacity here, but we also need other capacity to be maintained globally for everyone else and share in that global capability. But to give up the ability, for example, to produce we do not produce any antibiotics in the United States. India and China doing the vast majority. That's not acceptable. We need to have some capability to support, our economy, but share in the global capacity and resiliency.
Got it. Thank you. So, Bruce, this morning in the New York Times, it talked about the economic projection for the EU and how it's projected in 2020 to shrink by close to 8%. Let's talk a little bit about the UK and Brexit. Since they started this process of relying less on other countries before the virus, are they better off or worse off in trying to weather the storm?
I guess near term, they better hit the pause. They're completely unready. The whole structure is not ready for Brexit. So I think, wisely, I'm hoping that, looking at the pandemic and the current situation, that they will hit the pause button. The UK, as any nation state, has to figure out how to enter and engage in global trade. Unfortunately, global trade itself is being rewired and rebalanced, obviously, with China, asserting itself and kind of making its rules. So it's going into an environment that's difficult to deal with because of the pandemic. You're going to have low demand for multiple years in a trade environment that's already chaotic and hectic. Those are tremendous headwinds, for the UK. And I don't know that it would cause them to put the pause button for long term, but they are going to have to put the pause button for for the foreseeable future, I would hope.
We have a question, similar question, is one coming from Jerry Garland from Insight Consulting and the other one from Oscar Garcia at Morgan Stanley. Can you talk a little bit about the recovery for the U.S.? What does unemployment in the U.S. look like over the next few years?
It's, again, hugely problematic. The U.S., of course, will be the driver for demand. Unfortunately, you're going to have a lot of anxious consumers that just aren't certain. They're anxious about their current job status and whether they're even going to have a job. Maybe they're furloughed, but in 2 months that becomes permanent. So that whole kind of, the employment picture is going to be depressed, which is already going to, do damage to demand, which is going to impact the whole global picture. And so I guess at this point, what I'm saying is that the job picture is not bright, and it's going to take time. And that's why, we look at, late 2021 into 2022 before we can really start getting our legs underneath us globally, and especially in the United States.
Great, thank you. Two more questions. We are running out of time, but we've got one from Peter Bowie, Vice Chair of WTCI, wondering when we'll be able to travel again. And I'll share the other one, which is from Deborah Kilty, asking, you mentioned Vietnam being one of the winners of this crisis. What are some other countries that will benefit from the impact that COVID will have on globalization?
Sure. I'll take the last one first. We already have a lot of things wired into the Asian arena. And so other Asian countries like Taiwan and Cambodia and others, are getting some level of benefit of just rewiring some of the manufacturing, but maintaining the flow of what we're doing out there in Asia. So that's why they're winning. On the nearshoring, of course, I talked about Mexico. We think, again, when we future forecast, that one of the most incredible economic markets that doesn't exist but will birth out of this is the United States of the Americas. If you think about the US, Canada, Mexico, Latin America, and South America, we have everything that we need to create an amazing economic engine. We have natural resources, we have labor arbitrage, meaning cheaper labor to us. Transportation lines would be very short. We have two oceans that are protecting that economic engine. We see every indication that we will build an economic block here in the vertical integration versus the traditional horizontal integration across the globe. So that's, I guess, what I would say about the winners and losers. I think the Americas are going to be, and if you want to drive down immigration, give people jobs in Argentina and Honduras, and they won't leave home. Anyway, so that's that piece of it. On the travel piece of it, you can travel today. I've had people traveling, even if there's only 17 people on the flight. We put out a paper about a month ago about the safety of flying. It's probably one of the safest environments that you will be in within an infectious disease environment because of the air filtration turnover and everything that's there. So basically, if you put a mask on, sit quietly, kind of clean your little area there and sit and get to the other end of your flight and get off, it's a lot safer than driving a car, let's put it that way. So travel domestically is going to continue to increase here literally in the next 35, 60 days. International travel is going to be a huge bumpy ride for a long time, and the airlines know it. As borders come open and close and people are uncertain, and it's going to be a slow go on the long haul international flights.
Bruce, thank you so much. I know we're all anxious to get back to traveling and things back to somewhat of a normal status, but we really appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with our group today. We weren't able to get to all of the questions, but the good news is you will have the opportunity to converse with Bruce again. We have some upcoming sessions next week, a week from today. Bruce is going to be sharing with us what's going on in the global food security, which is a very important topic. And in 2 weeks from today, we're going to look at big changes driven by the pandemic. Couldn't think of a better partner, Bruce. We really appreciate your partnership on this and also with our board. And for those of you calling today who are new to WTCI, we would love for you to stay connected, and you can do so via our social media. You'll see here on the slide, and you can also learn about membership and how to be involved in other programs by contacting WTCI Senior Manager of Business Development, Lydia Yodi, at lydia@wtci.org. Thank you so much, and we look forward to conversing with you again next week. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Bruce.
Take care.